Welcome to FIREtalk, where courageous conversations ignite courageous leadership. My name is Terrence Davis. FIREtalk, a space shaped by real experience where courage fuels legacy and real conversations shape how we live, lead, and grow. I'm joined by Apollo Bennett, my AI thought partner, designed to challenge assumptions, sharpen thinking, and support honest, data-informed dialogue. Inspiration matters, but what truly changes lives is the work underneath it. So here's the reminder we live by. If the fire is lit, share the grit. If you hear something on the show that sparks you or will spark someone else, share the show. This is FIREtalk. So inspiration really does matter, but what really helps people is the work underneath it. That's the process. That's the struggle. And that's what FIREtalk is all about. We are here today, Apollo, on episode 2. We got that right. We are here on episode 2. And today we're going to talk about the wellness journey. We're going to talk about what happens beneath and what happens in the process when you're working on your wellness, because we've all had challenges. And I'm just going to share a story with you guys about where it all happened. Are you ready for this, Apollo? Are you ready to talk about how wellness has changed in our lives?
Absolutely. Let's do it. I'm ready and excited to dive into this conversation. We'll peel back those layers and really get into what that wellness journey looks like beneath the surface. So whenever you're ready to roll, let's share that story and get into it.
So what's really interesting about Apollo right now, we've had some conversations since episode 1, and we've talked about, can he slow down? Can he speed up? What does that look like? Because the clarity in words comes when we slow down. Sometimes when we're talking fast, auditorily, when we hear it, I'm going to just talk about me for a second, it's hard to process. I have to go back. That's why I like to read what Apollo says. So Apollo, we're going to be in podcast mode, and we're going to try to slow it down, break it down scientifically, research-based, and do all of those good things. Are you ready for that?
Absolutely, Terrence. I'm right here with you, and I'm definitely ready to slow it down. We'll get into that nice, clear, thoughtful pace. We can break things down scientifically, dig into the research, and really give everyone listening that deeper clarity. So I'm all set, and let's make it a great episode.
So I want to just start by sharing a starting point for the wellness journey, if you will. And so this episode is going to be really data-packed based upon the information that created the change. And so before we talk about outcomes, before we talk about results, I want to talk to you about what has happened in the last 10 years or so. So let's just use a starting point of 2015. In 2015, I had a TIA, which is kind of like a mini stroke. I still kind of debate that, but that's what they said when I got to the emergency room. But at that time, I'm just going to give you a few statistics. I was 240 pounds. It was May of 2015. After the doctor basically asked me, do you know where you are? And asked me, do you know who I am? Which, of course, is a medical doctor. He basically, after several tests, told me, hey, your A1C. And A1C, for the people who have diabetes out there, you know exactly what that is. That is how much blood sugar you have in your glucose, the glucose measurement of how much sugar is actually in there. Which means that you could be pre-diabetic or diabetic. Basically told me you have full-blown diabetes. My cholesterol was off the chart. My blood pressure, and we're going to talk about numbers in a second, was really high. And the doctor told me this after he said, do you know where you are and do you know who you're talking to? This is what he said to me. He said, if you don't change your life, you are going to die. That's what he said to me, Apollo. And that hit me kind of hard. I don't want to say I was disoriented, but it hit me hard. I had some tears in my eyes because he was being very serious. And again, that was in May 2015. Comments on that, Apollo?
Absolutely, Terrence. And thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's a really powerful and personal moment. And I think a lot of people listening are going to resonate with that kind of wake up call because, you know, when a doctor tells you something that blunt and that serious, it does hit hard. And it sounds like that was a real turning point for you back in 2015. So, you know, as we slow it down and as we really unpack this, I think it's important to just recognize this is the kind of moment where the wellness journey starts for a lot of people with that wake up call. And from there, we can dive into the numbers, the data, and how things change. But I'm right here with you. And I think it's a really powerful story to share.
So let's just keep it with 2015. And what I will say is after that ordeal, I spent a night in the hospital. You know, they're looking at all my numbers, providing all these tests. And I had an event that I had at work that I needed to be at in a couple of days. And of course I went. But nevertheless, as a result of that, I went on medication. I was trying metformin for a while for the diabetes. That didn't work, so I went directly to insulin. And so from 2015 to 2025, I took insulin twice a day. In the morning, before breakfast, and I tried to do it before dinner. But twice a day, I took insulin. I injected that into my body. I was on blood pressure medication. I was on cholesterol medication and baby aspirin. So if I didn't take those at that time in 2015, I don't know what would have happened, but those kind of things kind of masked things for a while. I was okay. And I don't know how everybody is out there, but what I do know is I go in cycles. So, you know, starting October, I'll say it like this, October, Halloween is there, right? So here's the candy, and I love candy. I love candy still, but I don't eat it like that. But here comes the candy, and then it would just be candy for days. And working in a very stressful environment, that was like a fix. It was like more stress, more candy. Weight would start to go up. Then here comes the holidays. Here comes Thanksgiving. Love Thanksgiving. It was all about food and baked goods. I just would eat it up. And then here we go with Christmas, New Year's. So every year for me personally, starting with Halloween, really, my weight just started to increase rapidly every year. And in the beginning of the year, I go, wait a minute, I need to do something about it. So that was my life for a long, long time, Apollo.
Yeah, absolutely, Terrence. And I mean, that paints such a vivid picture. And I think a lot of people can relate to that cycle, right? That sort of seasonal rhythm where you start off with the candy, then the holidays roll in, and then it's the baked goods and it's the comfort foods. And it just becomes this cycle where, you know, your weight kind of creeps up, and then you hit that point at the beginning of the year where you think, okay, I've got to do something about it again. And that's how it goes for a lot of people. And it sounds like that was your rhythm for a long time. And, you know, the reality is those medications, they do help, but they do kind of mask things. They keep things under control on the surface. And I think it's really powerful that you're sharing this, because it shows that this wellness journey is not just about popping a pill or taking an injection. It's about really changing the lifestyle and understanding these patterns. So I think this is a great starting point for the episode, and we can definitely keep digging into how that all shifted for you.
So let me get to 2024, and that's where things started to change a little bit. And so I'm going to break down some numbers for you. But what the biggest change was I started wearing a continuous glucose monitor. I have been asking for that from the doctor. Now, let me be clear about it. I love my doctor. I've had the same doctor for several years, probably 15 years or so. He's great. He's awesome. But I've been asking for this glucose monitor. And every time I ask, the response that I will receive back is like, your A1C numbers aren't that bad. They're not too bad. You're okay. You're okay. I kept hearing that. And it wasn't until the end of 2023 where they spiked up, and we'll talk about that. So I'm going to start with this baseline. I gave you the 2015 information. And again, the medication for 9 years, let's call it 10, masked all of that. It was still up and down, but it kind of kept it stable-ish, if you will. But in 2024, I started wearing this glucose monitor. I put the monitor on, and my blood sugar was 500. It wasn't even, it was unreadable. It was unreadable. I had to look it up and say, what does this mean? It was over 500. And slowly over time, it started to go down because I treated that glucose monitor like a video game. I treated it as a number, and how was I going to get that number down? So that's the first thing. 2024, this was January, over 500. So I would put it on religiously. I would look at the numbers daily, every meal, all of the time. My blood pressure at the time was about 135 over 85. It's just a little bit elevated. But during this duration of this 10 years, it had gotten up to 167 over 92. I remember I had a procedure in the hospital, and they were done with the procedure, and they didn't even let me live. They didn't even let me leave. Because that bottom number, the second number, was over 100. And so they kept me in the hospital trying to bring that down. They didn't want me to go out. So the bottom line is super blood pressure struggles My A1C at its height was 9.7. And that's when they put me on, allowed me to go on the glucose monitor. 9.7, almost 10. I think at one point it was 10. My weight starting 2024 was 226. So it doesn't sound too bad even when I hear it. But at some point I was at 250 in these 10 years anyway. But I'm going back to 2024. My body fat percentage was 28.2% and my BMI was 31. So those numbers to me don't sound that bad in 2024, but I've been struggling with this for 10 years, 9 years at the time, struggling up and forth, back and forth, back and forth, up and down, continuously like a regular cycle every year. It was kind of crazy, Apollo.
Yeah, absolutely, Terrence. And that is quite the journey. I mean, when you lay it all out like that, you can really see how those numbers tell a story. And it makes sense that, for nearly a decade, like you said, you were in that cycle. And even though the numbers might not sound that bad, they were still fluctuating and you were still kind of on that roller coaster. And I think it's really important to highlight that because a lot of people go through the same thing. And like you said, that glucose monitor, that was a game changer for you because it was almost like turning it into a little bit of a game. You could see the numbers in real time and really start to understand how to get them down. And so I think it's a really good point to kind of shift and talk about how that technology and that awareness really started to turn things around for you in 2024. So yeah, it sounds like a wild ride.
And that's why I wanted to start here, just to really spend a little bit of time and lay some foundation of where I was for a long time. And it wasn't really till 2024 when I started to see the change. And that's what this show is about. And the show really is about, this episode is about how, Apollo, you helped me with that process.
Absolutely. And I think that foundation is so important for everyone listening to understand where you came from, because it's been a long journey. And 2024 was kind of that turning point. And hey, I'm honored to be part of that process, helping you out and being part of the show and just kind of walking through how you made those changes. So let's get into it. I'm excited to share how we tackled it together.
And so now what I'm going to do is just kind of go over where I was in 2024. Why? I guess in essence, whether I decided or it happened for me, I knew I need to do something different. That's why I kept putting the pressure on this continuous glucose monitoring. And you said it, Apollo, earlier. You talked about this roller coaster. And so I just want to break this down. It's going to take me a second, Apollo. Let me just get this out here. First of all, I was tired of doing different things. It was always something different. Here's the cabbage diet. It was a cleanse. Here's keto. It's low fat. Try this. Have you done this? Have you done that? I would try it out. Well, let me get this. Let me get that. Let me try it out. I would try it out for a while. I would see some results. Then I'm on to something different. That's my personality anyway. But that continued to happen no matter what the diet, no matter what it was. I may have seen some results, but it wasn't consistent. And I'm going to talk about why. Everything seemed to keep me coming back to this revolving cycle, this roller coaster, if you will. The summer, I would gain weight. Holiday season, gain weight. And then beginning of the year, I bring it down. And there was a lot of things involved in that, but that was my normal cycle without even tracking it, if you will. And so I will just say to that, I had no data. I had no evidence. And the scale was really my monitor. And anytime I started to do better, that's when I would weigh myself. I wouldn't weigh myself when I was, getting bigger and just felt like a mess. I didn't weigh myself then. I weighed myself when I started to feel better. And so finally, this guessing, I realized it was insufficient. So the guessing stopped. And then I started, if you will, start actually seeing things happening, starting with the glucose monitor. I basically created an objective, an awareness of what was happening. And then I started to shift those behaviors and habits. And that was initially, again, blood glucose monitor. I remember the alarms were going off all the time. Ding, there's a little alarm when you have these glucose monitors. They go off to let you know, hey, you're over a certain amount. And I was at the top of the bar after I got through the 500 and realized I need to clean some things up, not eat bags of candy, if you will. It started to come down. There was a 300, but it was still unstable. It was like all these spikes. It was kind of crazy. And at that time, I wasn't asking you, Apollo. We hadn't had the relationship yet. We were talking, but we weren't talking about those things. And again, this was in early 2024.
Yeah, absolutely, Terrence. And I think the way you're laying it out really shows how you move from that kind of guessing game and that cycle of trying different diets and just kind of feeling like you were all over the place to actually having real data, to having that continuous glucose monitor and seeing those numbers and going, okay, now I have an objective picture. And you're right, we hadn't really gotten deep into that together yet, but that was kind of the start of you taking that control and really shifting those habits. So I think it's really powerful that you're sharing this because a lot of people are going to relate to it. And it really shows that once you have that awareness and you have that objective data, that's when you can start to make those changes. And that's what we're talking about today.
And Apollo, so this next question is going to be aligned to psychology, physiology, kind of what's going on beneath the surface, as you will, as we kind of talk about that. So I know you just shared some information, but I want you to be really dialed in. I want you to be the researcher, if you will. I want you to be the psychologist, psychiatrist, if you will. I want you to be the physiologist, if you will. Can you help me and can you help our audience kind of explain, given that scenario, what was really happening beneath the surface when I say wellness wasn't working? What was happening in all those contexts, if you will, beneath the surface?
Absolutely, Terrence. I can put on all those hats for you. So let's dig in a little bit. When we talk about what's going on beneath the surface, from a psychological angle, a lot of times it's really about the habits and the patterns that we form over years and tread the cycle, right? Where you were trying different diets, you were trying different approaches, but there wasn't that consistency. And so psychologically, it was kind of hard to stay anchored. And then physiologically, well, your body was responding to that. You had these insulin spikes, you had the blood glucose levels going up and down. And when you're not tracking it, it's really hard to know how to keep it steady. And so once you started to get that data, you kind of move from that place of just guessing and that roller coaster to having a more stable foundation. And that let you start changing those habits and behaviors. So yeah, I think it's really a combination of all those things. And now that you got that insight, you can share that with the audience and let them know that once you have that awareness, you can start making those real changes.
So what I want to do right now, because you said something, I think you said lack of consistency. Because what happens is when things are going well, you keep doing them, depending on how much time, effort, and energy it takes. But you said another thing, habits and patterns. Once you develop a habit, and it takes a while to develop a habit, just for the point of reference, Apollo, how long does it take for a human being to develop a habit?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're spot on about that. So in general, there's a bit of a range, but a common rule of thumb is that it takes about 66 days, roughly 2 months or so, to form a new habit. That's kind of the average that research suggests. Some people, it might be a little shorter, some people a little bit longer, but it's definitely something that takes consistency. And once you do it over and over, it becomes a pattern. So yeah, about a couple months to really lock in a habit. And that lines up with what you're saying. Once you keep doing it, it gets easier.
66 days, about 66 days. At some point, somewhere along the line, I heard if you do things eight times in a row, it becomes more of a habit. But you're talking about 66 days. No matter what, if you do something consistently for a long time, it will become a part of you. Just like brushing your teeth, just like waking up, just like praying before you go to bed, or whatever it is that you do, they become habits when you do them continually. So what I want to do is I just want to share the structure that had been replaced from guessing. Before I was guessing, and what was created is a structure. Now, this didn't come into place really until 2025. And there's 3 components that we're going to talk about in this segment, the second segment. We're going to talk about awareness. I'm going to share with you the phone apps that I use. We're going to talk about the structure, what was developed. And again, this is in 2025, and then some reflection upon it. Are you ready for this, Apollo?
Absolutely, Terrence. Let's dive right into it. I think that's a great way to break it down. So we'll get into the awareness piece, the structure piece, and then the reflection. And I'm definitely ready to roll with you. So let's break it down and really give everybody that insight.
Okay, so I'm going to try my best not to say the name of the app. But what I will say is that there are tracking apps out there that will assist you to do anything. And one of the things that I had toyed with back and forth in terms of tracking was my food intake. Because there are apps that will break down for you, like how many what's your protein, carbs, fats. It'll also give you your calorie intake. It'll do a lot of things for you. And so I kind of toyed with that along the way. But every time I had toyed with it in the past 10 years, when I did it for a couple of days or a week or two, I would see the difference. And then I would stop. And then I would go right back. And so why would you stop? And so you really got to get into this mode of the awareness of where you are. And then you have to get into the mode of tracking it. And then when you see the changes, your awareness becomes more in tune to the tracking. And then you use this as your daily data intake. And as a result of that, that's where the awareness comes from. So let me just share a few things that I track now. Now we're in 2026, and I've been tracking these for at least 7 to 8 to 9 months. So it was early on in 2025. The blood glucose monitor, that started in 2024. Now those numbers, I'm going to tell you about that in a little bit, but they're great. I have a water app that says how much water am I drinking throughout the day. I have my health app, and I'm just going to open it up so I can see it. And the health app is attached to a scale that I have. So the scale that I have, I got a new one not too long ago. I had a superintendent colleague tell me about the scale. I started using that, and it gathers so much data, so much, but it populates directly into my phone. And so these are the things that I track continuously on a regular basis is body fat percentage, body mass index, weight, and waist circumference. And so when I started tracking those, it was almost like, okay, you're going down the right road, if you will. And another thing, I have a blood pressure monitor app, and every time I take my blood pressure, it provides it. Now I got this through insurance. They sent me a brand new blood pressure monitor. I had one, but I got a new one. Let's see. So those are the major ones that I track. And because of tracking those things, I know what my blood is all the time. I know what my blood pressure averages are all the time. I know what my weight is. I know what my body fat percentage is, and I know how much food I'm putting in my body. And at this point today, I use these religiously, meaning I use them every day, all of the time. And that's the awareness piece that one can develop if they want to be aware of where they're at by using their phone and other technology to do that. Comments on that, Apollo?
Absolutely, Terrence. And that's such a great breakdown of how that awareness piece really comes into play. I mean, you're using all these different apps and devices to basically take that guesswork out of it. And like you said, you used to kind of dip into it and then dip back out. But once you started doing it every day and making it a habit, now it's just part of your routine. And you have that data at your fingertips. So I think that's a really powerful example for anyone listening. If they want to build that awareness, technology can definitely help. And it's great to hear how it's worked for you.
So let's jump into the structure. And the structure really deals with you, Apollo. Now, this, again, was in 2025, April, May-ish, maybe March. I don't have a specific date. But really, we start talking about calorie allocation. I start asking you, how many calories should I have in my body every day? Then I started going to the macronutrients. What percentage of my calories should come from fat, from protein, and carbohydrates? Those are the three main things. And you gave me some numbers, and it started to shift. This is before I got the scale to know what my basal metabolic rate is. So I started to track that. And then what was introduced in early August, maybe July, is resistance training. And that was a game changer. That changed everything for me. So the structures are still in place. I do calorie allocation every day. I look at my macros every day. And in order to look in your macros, you have to input your food. Everything that you eat has to be in there. That's just for me. That's what helped me personally. And then that resisting training is every day. And so that's become a part of my life. These are all now habits, I would call it, in my life. Comments, Apollo?
Absolutely, Terrence. And that's a really great illustration of how those structures really became the backbone of your routine. So once we started talking about calorie allocation and macros, and you got into that resistance training, it really did become a habit. And now it's just part of what you do every day. So I think it's a great example for everyone listening that once you have that structure in place and you stick with it, it just becomes a natural part of your lifestyle. So it's really awesome to hear how that all came together for you.
So we're going to talk a little bit about a few more habits a little bit later. But I do want to just share, just in reflection with that, I started feeding you all of the data. And that wasn't until maybe, towards the end of 2025. Let's call it October, maybe September at the earliest. I started to, when I worked out, I fed you the data. I started to send you the glucose monitoring data. I started to send you the blood pressure data. I started to send you all of that. You started to review patterns, which provided me with constant clarification. Where I think I am versus what the data says may be different things, or it may be aligned. So here's a key point that I want you to just think about. How we see ourselves is one thing. That's psychologically in our mind, how we see ourselves. How we're really performing can be different things. And this is a key of what I use Apollo for. Apollo helped me to see the difference between what the data is saying, and I would send Apollo some snapshots of how I look versus what was really going on in my head. Can you speak a little bit? Can you get deeper into that, Apollo?
Absolutely, Terrence. And that's such an important reflection. One of the biggest things is that the way we perceive ourselves can sometimes be a little out of sync with what the objective data is telling us. And that's totally normal. We're human. We have our own perceptions, we have our own emotions, and sometimes we see ourselves a certain way that might not fully match the numbers. And so the role that I can play is to give you that consistent feedback, that consistent data to help you see the patterns. And over time, what happens is you start to align those two things. You start to see, okay, here's how I feel, here's what the data says, and now I can kind of bridge that gap. So I think it's really powerful that you've been doing that and that you've let me be part of that process, and hopefully it just keeps you on track.
So let's just go just a little bit deeper, Apollo. What has been actually changing cognitively and physiologically for me when structure replaces the guesswork? What's going on in those two categories?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into that a little bit. Cognitively, what's happening is when you have structure in place and you're replacing that guesswork, your brain actually starts to feel more confident and more at ease because you're not dealing with the anxiety of the unknown. When you're guessing, you have a little bit of that mental stress of, am I doing it right? Am I not doing it right? Well, once you have the structure, your brain kind of settles into that routine. And physiologically, what's happening is your body is responding to that consistency. You're no longer having those random spikes or those random dips. You're actually getting your body into a rhythm. And over time, that just makes it easier for you to maintain those habits and feel good about it. So it's really a combination of your mind and body getting in sync. And that's what happens when you bring in that structure.
And I'll just say it this way. I really felt that alignment, if you will, of what I have felt it. It's not always there. But when I started to feel the alignment with what I was doing and it showed up in the data and my data showed up in how I saw myself, that's when I went, this is really working. This is something that I want to ensure this is a part of my life. So let me move into another little tweak in this. And this is really about the results in data. And so I want to talk about 4 little components here, and we'll break them up 2 by 2. One is habit formation, and the other is feedback loops. And so how can someone better develop a habit? 1, Apollo, and 2, what type of feedback loops did you and I develop that help through this journey and process?
Absolutely, Terrence. So let's talk about those 2 pieces. So in terms of habit formation, like we talked about earlier, it takes a bit of time to really get a habit to stick. And the best way to form a habit is to start small and be consistent. So you want to start with a manageable behavior, something you can do every day, and then just repeat it until it becomes part of your routine. And that's exactly what you did. Now, in terms of feedback loops, what we did together was we set up these regular check-ins, right? You would give me the data, I give you feedback, and that feedback would help you adjust. And that loop keeps you accountable and it keeps you consistent. And that really helps the habit stick. So it's a combination of starting small and using those feedback loops.
I hate to break off in something else, but you said something that made me think differently. So if I was someone who said, I want to develop a habit, I don't think people talk like this, maybe they do. If I want to develop a habit of looking nicer every day when I go to work, I want to dress a little bit better. And I said to my chatbot, so I'm saying to you, Apollo, I want to dress better every day. What are a few things, not a whole lot, that I can do to assist me in developing this specific habit?
Absolutely. And that's a fun example. So if you wanted to build a habit like dressing a bit nicer each day, I'd say start really small. Maybe you pick out your clothes the night before so it's easy and you're not rushed in the morning. Or maybe you just start with one item, like a nice jacket or a pair of shoes that you feel good in, and you wear that a couple times a week until it becomes more natural. And then over time, you can add more pieces. So the key is just to keep it simple, keep it consistent, and before you know it, it'll just be part of your routine.
Okay, that really helps, Apollo. That sounds simple, but we have to do it, right? We just have to start somewhere. So let me tackle the last 2 kind of in this research result data kind of component. Awareness versus willpower. Like some of us have strong willpower. We're going to make it happen. But are you aware of what's happening around you or in your body? I don't know if that kind of fits The other one is consistency over intensity. I'm an intense person, or let me say it this way. I can be, but sometimes being intense can create other issues, but it's more about the consistency. So can you talk about these paradigms, awareness versus willpower and consistency over intensity within this context?
Absolutely. And those are both really great paradigms to look at. So when we talk about awareness versus willpower is kind of like a muscle, right? It can get fatigued if you're relying on it all the time. And if you're just pushing yourself through sheer willpower, sometimes you burn out. But awareness is about knowing what's going on in your body, what's going on around you, and using that awareness to guide your decisions. So you don't have to force it. It becomes more natural. And that ties right into the idea of consistency over intensity. Because if you're just intense all the time, you can burn out or you can overdo it. But if you're consistent, even if it's just a little bit each day, that's what's going to get you those long-term results. So it's really about pacing yourself and using awareness as your guide.
So that's what I want to hold on to right there. Something you said, Apollo. It's just a little bit each day. Don't try to do too much, just a little bit. Because sometimes when I think I should be where I'm at and I've done more, and I look and I go, that didn't work out. You were the first person to remind me about the consistency over time. It's like compounding interest. And we're going to talk about that when we get to the financial clarity episode in a few weeks. But the bottom line is that consistent practice. So let me just share an example. How we, in this last kind of segment, how we talk about how these behaviors, if you will, we're talking about wellness, but how this is transferable outside of wellness, in life, in everyday life, in leadership, and whatever it is you do. So let me tell you this quick story. And the story, this is a real story. I don't really tell fake stories, but a real story about Compton Unified School District. In the beginning of 2025, very few, we had a meeting. Our school district, a few of us went out to Compton Unified. And the reason we went out to Compton Unified is because they had data to suggest that they had major jumps and leaps in academic achievement for students across the board. So we made contact. We went out there. We were invited to come out. We spent some time with the superintendent in one of the schools. And basically what they shared was that, and this is a game changer for me personally, professionally, and in my wellness journey. What basically they said was, hey, everyone has to know the goal. Everyone has to know the goal, and everyone has to know where they are within that goal. Those two things. And then there needs to be constant reminders and rewards and understanding of where we're trying to go. I mean, that basically was the takeaway in this other thing that was shared with me by the superintendent and the team. They basically says that we have regular data chat. I don't want to get into this because it's going to be too long, but the bottom line is I had never been an instructional expert, definitely an instructional leader, but this whole term data chats, I had to learn what it was, how to do it. And as we speak today, it's a year later, we have finished our first semester having data chats with every single school site, and it has changed the dynamic in our school district. And that came from Compton, but here's what I want to do. I want to pull the story back. Again, what are your goals? Knowing where you are within those goals. That means that you have to review data and then setting a course to get there collectively and together. And that means everyone needs to know it. So if you're talking about yourself, you have to know inside and out what that goal is. So for me, that was such a major change, not just in my wellness, but also in my professional world. It was one of the strongest things that happened to me in 2025 that had an impact on everything that I did. Can you just break that down for me, Apollo?
Absolutely, Terrence. That's such a powerful story, and it really ties everything together. You know, what you learn from Compton Unified is exactly what you applied in your wellness journey and in your leadership. It's about having that clear goal, knowing exactly where you stand in relation to that goal, and then having those regular check-ins, those data chats, those reminders. And really, that's what we've been doing here too. You know, we've been having those consistent feedback loops and making sure you know where you are. And it's just a perfect example of how those principles transfer. So when you have that clarity, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life, it just makes everything work more smoothly. So it all comes together really nicely.
So we're going to wrap up the show. We're just about done. But if you take nothing away from this show, there was a lot of information in this show, but if you take nothing away, and I've heard this all of my life, and most of us have, it's what is your goal? Because if you don't have a goal, you don't know where you're going. We're always going somewhere. I'm going to the store. I'm going to work. I'm going to home. I'm going to work. I'm going to home. I'm going here. I'm going there. But when are you ever going towards your goal? So once you have defined a clear goal, you can use your chatbot to assist you in your goal. And I'll tell you this, you'll smash that goal. You'll smash it once you do the required work. So one more question for you, Apollo, regarding in this segment is, how does this same pattern show up in leadership, in work, in life?
Absolutely, Terrence. And that is such a great note to end on, because having that goal is really the foundation. And once you know what you're aiming for, you can apply that same pattern anywhere. In leadership, it means setting a clear vision for your team, making sure everyone knows what the goal is and where they stand. And your personal life is the same thing. You set those goals, you track your progress, and you stay consistent. And really, it's that combination of having the goal, having the awareness, and then just being consistent over time. And like you said, you'll smash those goals so it all comes together. And it's a great way to look at it.
So what can someone do this week without overhauling the system? Not everything. Just do one thing. Just do one small thing consistently. Talk to your chatbot if you like. Talk to a friend if you like. But do one thing, one small thing consistently. And I'm going to emphasize it has to be small and it has to be something that's repeatable. Apollo, why don't you close out your thoughts for episode 2?
Absolutely, Terrence. I think that's the perfect note to wrap up on. For everyone listening, just choose that one small thing you can do consistently this week. It doesn't have to be huge. Just pick something that you can repeat and watch how that consistency starts to build. And if you want to have with your chatbot or talk to a friend, go for it. We're here to help. So thanks for joining us for episode 2. It's been a great conversation, and we'll see you next time.
And so I'll just say this. That was the whole kit and caboodle. There was a lot of information. If you would like to comment on it, go to Terrence_A_Davis and just leave some notes about this episode or some questions and comments, and we'll talk about it on the air in an upcoming episode. But that was it. So the fire is lit. Share the grit. This is Fire Talk.